Me. Welcome, everybody. And I want to start with, doesn't the courthouse look fabulous? That gorgeous landscaping. And as a reminder, we're still selling the personalized bricks. We have applications here, or you can go online and order them at talesofcapecod.org. Also, we rent the courthouse to the public for certain occasions, weddings, meetings, memorials. You can get more info on renting on our website. We'd like to thank Grace Galvin and Susan Swager for their contribution of treats for the receptions tonight. Next Monday, our speaker will be Casey Sherman, talking about his new book, Murder in Hollywood. Should be a good one. Tonight, our sponsors are me, Terry and Mark Riley, mwah, Lynn and Steve Hasselin, and let's have a big hand. I'm very proud to introduce our speaker tonight. Most people know I was a flight attendant for American Airlines for 38 years. And lived to tell the tale. So I consider Anne a kindred spirit. Oh, the memories, Anne. Being a flight attendant is a unique job. It's a, quote, been there, done that kind of job. That sums it up. Now about Anne. From People magazine, an entertaining and fascinating memoir of a gifted storyteller, Anne Hood's adventures as a flight attendant in Fly Girl. Pretty good, huh? And People. In 1978, the tailwind of the golden age of travel, ain't that the truth? Flight attendants were the epitaph of glamour and sophistication. Fresh out of college and hungry to experience the world, and maybe one day write about it, Anne Hood joined their ranks. After a grueling job search, Hood survived TWA's rigorous breach training academy. Sounds gruesome. And learned to evacuate 7 kinds of aircraft, deliver a baby, mix proper cocktails, administer oxygen, and stay calm no matter what the situation. You forgot psychiatrist. Oh yeah. In the air, Hood found both the adventure she dreamed of and unexpected realities of life on the job. She carved Chateaubriand, oh yeah, in the first-class cabin and dined in front of the pyramids of Cairo, more than 1,000,000 miles in high heels, oh yeah. She flew through the start of deregulation, an oil crisis, massive furloughs, and a labor strike. As the airline industry changed around her, Hood began to write, even drafting snatches of her first novel from the jump seat. I can see you doing that. She reveals how the job empowered her, despite its roots in sexist standards and weight. Whoa, that weight thing. packed with funny, moving, and shocking stories of life as a flight attendant. Fly Girl captures the nostalgia and magic of air travel at its height and the thrill that remains with every takeoff. That's true. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce a kindred spirit, Anne Hood and Fly Girl.
I'm so sorry we never got to fly together, different airlines, so that would have been hard. But so just a couple things. Thank you, Leslie. That was fabulous. It takes one fly girl to know one, so that was great. So just a couple things. And Leslie, I'm actually surprised you didn't do this. The emergency exits are here, here, and out this window if you're desperate. Oh, I have one more piece of business. So, you know, my publicist sets up all these wonderful events for me. She's fabulous. But, you know, she's off in Canada on a vacation, and I'm driving to Cape Cod and working. So would everybody just wave? Yeah. Wait a minute, I lost it. No, not it. Okay, just say hi, everyone. Oh, beautiful. Look at you. Hi. Enjoy Canada. Okay. So yes, I'm here to talk about. What's that?
The musicians all come out at the end of the gig now, and they do a selfie.
Oh, do they? I don't know. I haven't been to a concert since Simon and Garfunkel. Okay, so I'm here to talk about Fly Girl. But my new book, which came out in May, is a novel called The Stolen Child. And, oh, yes, I love you. Okay. And they are, interestingly, a little bit intertwined. So if you'll forgive me for talking about this a minute also, you'll see why. I was writing The Stolen Child before the pandemic. We remember that, in 2020. I had started it about 2 years before. It takes me typically 2 to 5 years to write a novel. And I was writing it. It began, and I'm getting to Fly Girl, believe me, this is all connected. The Stolen Child began because one day I was sitting on my couch knitting, which is what I do every afternoon at around 4 o'clock. And I just started feeling weepy. And I was crying a little, and I was like, oh, here I go again. Like, I'm such a crybaby. I cry so much. Oh, my goodness. I should have collected all the tears I've cried. I would have so many. And then I'm like, would I have 1 million? And then I thought, I would have 1 million just for Peter Hayhurst breaking up with me in 1972. I cried for that whole summer, you know. So I was like, yeah. And then if I collected them all, I would label them. Peter Hayhurst, waste of time, 1972, you know? But then I thought, well, okay, now you've collected them and you've labeled them appropriately. What would you do? And I thought, well, I'd start a museum of tears, obviously. And I put my knitting down and I went to my computer and I wrote about a man who begins a museum of tears in Italy. And thus began this novel, The Stolen Child, which until a year ago was called The Museum of Tears. Why did it change? Well, because there's something called publicity and marketing who kind of run writers' lives. And I got an email from my editor, and she said, sit down, you're not going to like this email. Publicity and marketing hate the title. Because there are 3 books coming out this year called The Museum of Something. And I was like, I don't care, The Museum of Tears is the best title ever. I'll never change mine, you know. And then she said, okay, I get it, Anne, think about it. Because, you know, someone's going to go into Titcom's bookstore and say, I want that book I read about the Museum of, and they're going to sell someone else's book. And I was like, I'll change the title. So it became The Stolen Child because this is from a Yeats poem. And really at the heart of this novel is about a World War I soldier who is asked to save a baby and doesn't do it and leaves it in an abandoned village and for the rest of his life wonders what happens to that baby. And at the end of his life hires a young, spunky girl to go with him to unravel the mystery of that baby. So there is a stolen child in it, actually. I'm happily writing this, doing research on World War I, remembering the 1970s, which is when they go back to find the baby. The pandemic hits. I won't even go to the grocery store. I'm writing, and writers say they suffer and they're tortured. I am the happiest when I get to sit down and write, but I was not feeling happy because, I was trapped inside. My son and his girlfriend, their 2 cats, my teenage daughter who was so depressed, my husband, me, our 2 cats. I mean, it was a lot, as we all know. We've all got some version of that story, and I just couldn't write. I couldn't write my Museum of Tears. And I was like, oh man, I can't go anywhere. Like, we voted my husband to go to the grocery store, and he would go like in his hazmat suit, and we'd spray him down when he came back and not open the boxes for 2 days. I mean, you remember all that stuff? And I started fantasizing about my days as a flight attendant when I went everywhere, anywhere, all the time, anytime I wanted. It was my job. I got paid to go to these places. And I was like, people have been telling me for years you should write about being a flight attendant, but I never saw a story in it. I saw anecdotes. Leslie and I were talking, you're the best person to sit next to at a dinner party because you can talk forever about all the wacky stuff that happens on airplanes. But that doesn't make a book. So I was like, I kind of think I should write about this, but what am I actually writing about? I can't just write a bunch of things like that time I had the liquor cart and I asked the guy what he wanted to drink, and I noticed he had no pants on. And he just had on his tighty whities, but with a jacket, tie, and shirt. And I said, sir, where are your pants? And he said, in the overhead compartment, like it was the most normal answer. And I said, why? And he said, well, I don't want them to wrinkle. And oddly, at this point in my career, that made a certain sense. And so I said, well, okay, and I gave him a blanket. We used to have those on airplanes, not anymore. I gave him a blanket and said, well, when you leave the plane, please put your pants on. So it's like, that's funny, or how about the guy it was Frankfurt to Kennedy, and I looked, people are walking on, whatever, and I look, and this guy is riding his bicycle on the plane, on the 747, just riding down, and I stopped him. I'm also wondering, who's sleeping on the job out there that they let a guy come in on a bicycle? But I said, sir, what are you going to do with your bicycle? He goes, put it in the overhead. I said, if you can get it up there, you can keep it on the plane. And he couldn't do it, so he rode off. Don't know what happened to him. These are funny stories, and they happened every day. Every time you got on a plane, you did not know what was going to happen. But that doesn't really make a memoir. And so I started in the dark days, March and April and May of 2020, just revisiting what it was like in those days. I watched commercials, and I saw the ads, and I just started getting very excited, but I'm looking for a story. I'm looking for a story that will hold this all together. And then I realized, wow, when I started in 1978, and believe me, Leslie could write a bigger book than I did because she flew for 38 years. When I started in 1978, it was kind of the end of what they called the golden age of travel. And by the time I stopped, 8 years later, it was the beginning of whatever you call what we have now. Certainly not golden. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. It was the beginning of that. So I realized that I had sort of a historical context for this story. Because when I began flying, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but it's worth Boston to LA. I was based in Boston originally. Boston to LA. Here's what we would do in coach. Hand out menus. Choice of 5 entrees. After takeoff, on my TWA pad, not an iPad, like a paper pad, and my TWA pen, I would take the order of which entree you wanted. We would come around with hot towels, which more than once someone thought was a tortilla and put in their mouth, which I always thought was funny. Like you just watch them shoving the hot towel in their mouth. We'd come around with hot towels. Then we would do liquor, cocktail service with the nuts or pretzels or whatever. Then an appetizer service, which from Boston to LA were skewers of mozzarella and tomato and basil. Always, refilling the cocktails. Then whatever your choice of 5 was, we would serve. Then there was a dessert service, an after-dinner drink service in which we would fill the top of the liquor cart with like Galliano and Amaretto, those things in your mother's cabinet that covered with dust, we had them all. And we would put dry ice and wet it so it made like a cloud. And we would walk down the aisle in our cloud and serve after-dinner drinks. Not done, the TWA mint service on silver trays. Those melt-away mints, I love them, but like a bigger, light green, TWA stamped on it. That would be it. Then the movie, everybody had to watch the same one. And then during the movie, we gave lemonade and popcorn. I know. And then when you landed, another hot towel, so you would go off refreshed. That was in Coach, 1978. I know. So I'm remembering that and remembering the last time I had flown, and I'm like, yeah, things have changed a lot. Never mind what they were doing in first class, right? Which, as Leslie mentioned, TWA was famous for their Chateaubriand service, cooked to order. Like, you think you can't do that on a plane, but oh yeah, this guy wants well, and that person wants medium rare, and salad tossed in the aisle, hot fudge sundaes made in the aisle. So they're working a lot harder in first class. But I'm remembering how great it was for passengers as well as for the person who served. And I'm sort of circling a story as I think about this. My Museum of Tears is relegated to a file that I'm not opening because I'm not feeling very creative, and I'm frozen, in my apartment. And I just said, I'm just going to start writing. I'm going to start writing about why I wanted to be a flight attendant, the interview, which I remember. American didn't hire me. In fact, it's a funny story. So I come home from college, senior year. I'm an English major. So many jobs, waiting for me. I come home, winter break, and my parents sit me down and they're like, well, you're going to graduate and you're an English major, so what are you going to do for a job? And you're not going to move back home, right? And I say, I want to be a flight attendant. And my mother's like, oh, honey, you should go work for the post office. That's a better job. My father's like, wait a minute. If you're a flight attendant, do we get free tickets? And I say yes, and he's like, get in the car. And he drives me to Logan Airport, terminal to terminal. Those were the days when you could do that. And I come back to Rhode Island, to my little town in Rhode Island, stack of applications. And my father's like, let's fill those out. And, some were more involved than others. But what I said to him was, I don't want to fly for Allegheny Airlines and live in Pittsburgh and fly to Columbus, Ohio every day. If you want to be a flight attendant, you kind of want to go far away. You want to go to Paris. And only at that time, that was Pan Am and TWA. Now, I know now you can get on United, Delta, American, they all go, but in those days, no. My father urged me to also apply to United because he had heard, and he was right, that they were getting the China route and that they were going to have Asia. So I reluctantly applied to them and to Eastern Airlines because they went to the Caribbean, which was far away from West Warwick, Rhode Island. That's all I wanted. So my first interview is with American Airlines at the airport in Warwick. And my father says, okay, this guy at work, his daughter just had her interview. And she blew it. Because she walked in there and she did not do anything. She just sat down and stared at the interviewer. You want to be a flight attendant, you have to be friendly. You have to go in, you have to say, my name is Ann, you shake hands, you're so friendly. I'm like, I got this, I can do this. My mother takes me to Casual Corner. We buy a black polyester suit with a print shirt and a scarf tied jauntily around my neck like a flight attendant, And my father takes me to the airport in Providence, and I walk in, and I'm like, hi, I'm Ann, I'm so happy to be here, and I shake her hand, and I was like, oh, this is so exciting, and she's like, okay, thank you, goodbye. I was, wait, goodbye? But I did what my father told me to do, and didn't get the job, didn't get another interview, don't know what I did wrong. I don't think it was the suit, because it got me hired at TWA, but I'm not sure, but I did not get hired there, and that's when it hit me like, oh, it's hard to get this job. I thought you just needed to smile, but no, you need a lot more. So back in my apartment during the pandemic, I'm remembering all this stuff, and I'm writing and writing and writing, and I called my agent, and I said, I think I'm writing a memoir about being a flight attendant. And she said, it's about time. We have been waiting. You always talk about it. Everybody wants to read this. She says, hold on, send me what you have. And I swear it was minutes later that my editor was on board and I had a contract, and all of a sudden I'm on the path to putting this book, The Museum of Tears, away and starting this book. And as I wrote it, what I realized is this book, Fly Girl, is about the airline industry. And it is about what it was like to fly in the golden age of travel. But it was even more a coming-of-age story. Like, I came of age at 35,000 feet. Everything I learned about how to be in the world, I learned on an airplane. And I would not be able to stand up here in front of you and do this if I had not been a flight attendant. Oh my God, I got that microphone in my hand. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 622 to wherever. I was like, gone. That was it. I was like, I am in my element. I loved having that mic in my hand. But I realized 21 years old and set out into the world, and scared and excited in equal measure. But by the time I left that job, which I left because of a labor dispute, I would not have left it. I would have stayed longer. I had grown up into a woman. I mean, it really, that's where I came of age. And that's when I knew this is a book. Now I've got a story to tell. I wanted to be a flight attendant back when they were called stewardesses. When I was like a little girl, 7 or 8 years old, I read Little Women. And when I finished that book and I closed it, I knew I wanted to be a writer. I had this thought, I want to live in a book, and I want to write a book just like this one. But when I was about 11, I used to go to the library every Saturday, like maybe many of you did, and look at all the books. I picked a paperback off a shelf, and the name of it was How to Become an Airline Stewardess. I had never flown. I didn't know anything about it. I checked that book out. The first line of that book was, would you like a boyfriend in every city in the world? I was like, yes, I would, by the way. So shortly afterwards, we had to go into the guidance counselor's office in my little town of West Warwick, kind of a dingy little mill town, and tell Mr. Stone, the guidance counselor, what we wanted to be. Because unbeknownst to us, they were tracking us for college, or what they called the commercial course, right? So I started with, I'd like to be a writer, and Mr. Stone, with his mutton chop sideburns and his tinted aviator glasses, it was 1968, said, oh, Anne, people don't become writers. And I said, well, how do we get all those books? And he looked over and he said, all the people who wrote those books are dead. And I looked over and he was right. They were all, Hemingway and all those guys, they were all dead. So I thought, what a weird career. Like, you write a book and then you die and then it's on show. That does not seem like a good path. So he said, so you're not going to do that. What else would you like to do? And I said, well, I'd like to be an airline stewardess. And he said, what is wrong with you? He's like, where do you get these crazy ideas? And smart girls do not become airline stewardesses. And I said, well, okay, I'm out of ideas. Like, I'm 11. You tell me. And he said, well, you can be a teacher or a secretary or just make your life easy and get married. And I thought, that's not working for me, Mr. Stone. So I held on to these kind of seemingly contradictory dreams all the way through college, because I had decided that, yes, I wanted to be a writer, but I had led a pretty sheltered life, so I needed adventures. And I would get those adventures as an airline stewardess. As I said, when I was hired, they were now flight attendants. But I just thought they worked perfectly together. Even in college, my advisor, who I saw once, laughed at me when I said I wanted to be a writer, and laughed harder when I said a flight attendant. So I wasn't really getting a lot of help in following these dreams, but I just believed in them. And I knew that one would feed the other. I knew that if I was a flight attendant, I would see the world, which I was desperate to do, and I would have fun doing it, right? So 1978, my father takes me to get all the applications, and then I begin this arduous process of interviewing. Eastern, United, American, they cut me out right away, Pan Am, and TWA. And still I held Pan Am and TWA as sort of the places I wanted to fly. I failed the French test at Pan Am. When, during it, the lovely man said, Anne, could you say in French, and I had studied it for 7 years, by the way, in junior high and high school, could you say, please put your bag in the overhead rack? I was like, what? S'il vous plaît something. I mean, I don't know. I studied French, but we didn't get into that part. And so I kind of stumbled. And he said, it's okay, you're nervous. It's okay. And moments before, they had told me I was going to Honolulu for training. I would be fitted for my uniform that very afternoon. But I had to pass the French test. So when I got that wrong, I could not do, ladies and gentlemen, we're about to land in Paris. Please put your seat backs and tray tables in their original upright and locked positions. I was like, I looked at him, I said, this isn't going to work. And he said, I know. I'm so sorry. So I didn't get Pan Am, but I was hired by TWA and United. And obviously TWA was one of my, like the gold standard for me. So off I went to Kansas City, where we were sat down and told that it was harder to get that job than it was to get into Harvard, because so many people wanted so few jobs. And for the next 6 weeks, we were, and I don't know if this was your experience, Leslie, I'm curious, but we were bullied and humiliated and also praised and taught many things, but oh my gosh, it was more stressful than 4 years of college, right? I mean, I had never done anything so hard. Of hell.
We had like 120.
How many graduated?
40.
Yeah, that's what it's like. You'd come back to your little suites or whatever, and just a made bed and all the clothes gone. Another one bites the dust.
It's like the military.
Crazy, crazy. And so, most nerve-wracking thing, but I pass, I get my wings, I do my first flight, and it is from Boston to LA, and it was on a Lockheed 1011, which no longer fly, and you're old when it's like, none of the planes I flew fly anymore, literally. 707, 727, 747, Lockheed 1011, none of the DC-9, they're all gone. But a Lockheed 1011, which was my favorite plane ultimately, and there was this weird position called GX, and basically what GX did was everything. They did all the grunt work. They ran around heating rolls, pouring wine, setting up carts, helping in coach, helping in first class, the worst. And the very senior crew, who when I said, it's my first flight, they rolled their eyes and said, you're GX. And I was like, oh my God, my nightmare has come true. And I ran around in my high heels, not knowing that it was actually okay to change your shoes during the flight and wear flats. No one had mentioned that. So my feet kept swelling and swelling and swelling until I kicked off the high heels and worked in my stocking feet. And did everything wrong and got yelled at. And then they were based in LA and all went home, and I went to the hotel where I had imagined I was gonna go to Laurel Canyon somehow and find Joni Mitchell. I don't know what I was thinking, it was LA. I crawl into this hotel, you get in the bed, get a club sandwich from room service, call my parents who are so excited. They're like, was it great? I was like, And they said, tell us everything. And I said, well, I had someone famous on board. And they're like, oh my God, was it Elizabeth Taylor? I said, no. My father's like, Al Pacino, right? It's Al Pacino. I was like, no, you remember the TV show Room 222? And they're like, kind of? He was on that show. They're like, oh, that's disappointing. Anyway, I thought I'll never going to do this job again. Like, I have picked the wrong thing. Next day, I have to do it all again, get back to Boston. I get in my uniform, I go down for breakfast. I notice it's a little empty in the restaurant, but it's quite early. And I'm sitting there eating my omelet, and this guy comes up to me and he's like, so you work for your TWA flight attendant? I said, what are you doing? I said, I'm having breakfast, I'm on the early flight. He said, well, so am I. And I said, well, you're not even in your uniform. He's like, it's 3 a.m. here. And I said, oh, that's right. It's 6 o'clock in Boston. Somehow, from that inauspicious first flight and second flight, within weeks, I was feeling so confident on those airplanes. And I knew that I had done the perfect job for me. And I want to read, and then, let's open it up for questions. Yeah, I want to read one part. I have to find it. I should have marked it, but it's Titcomb's book, not mine. Just something, because people always ask, and please, ask me anything. Ask Leslie anything. She knows more than I do. What were, the crazy things that happened, the sad things, the scary things. But I want to read about one of my favorite things that happened. So let me just find it. Talk among yourselves. La la la, this happened, that happened. Okay, wait. Yes, okay. This is called dramatic tension when you write novels. Okay, I got it. Never has the magic of flying been more obvious to me than on a long ago December flight, right before Christmas of 1985. The captain of the 747 I was working from Rome to JFK invited me to sit in the cockpit for landing. He told me I had to be absolutely quiet. I strapped into the extra jump seat, already enjoying the view out of the large cockpit windows. The pilot spoke to the air traffic controllers. Things beeped. The 450 tons of metal and glass began to descend into the winter evening. As we descended, snow started to fall, small, bright flakes like fairy dust. Then Manhattan came into sight, its snowy, illuminated skyline rising majestically before us. The air grew tense, electric with voices and the crackles of the radio. The ground seemed to lift up to greet us, that glittery snow falling heavier, the lights of the runway and the jet brighter, until the wheels hit the ground and the magic ended. We were back on Earth. Overcome, my eyes teared up. It's something, isn't it? The captain said softly. I could only nod. Few times in my life have I experienced something that felt that majestic, that reminded me that I was alive. The lava from the volcano crashing red and fiery into the Pacific Ocean on the big island of Hawaii, standing beneath the Great Pyramid at Giza, the feel of babies sliding out of my body, 2 babies, Sam and Grace, then unbelievably holding Grace, dead suddenly at only 5 years old from a virulent form of strep. And then 3 years later in a sterile city hall in Changsha, China, holding my daughter Annabelle, an 11-month-old baby girl I'd traveled halfway around the world for. And then that snowy landing, when I understood as much as we can, how sky and earth and snow and light and man coexist. Thank you. Okay, so questions. Yeah.
I saw that documentary,
Oh.
Fly With Me.
Yeah,
And it's,
I know, right?
and I was wondering, had you experienced some of those horrendous? I
Yeah.
don't know if anyone else-
Yeah, so let me explain. So, you know the PBS series An American Experience? They did one on flight attendants, and I was kind of a big part of it. I was interviewed for it, along with other former flight attendants. I started. That's me with the wrinkled shirt at the beginning. I'm like, oh my God, I wore linen, it's so wrinkled. But I just got an email out of the blue from an amazing documentary writer and filmmaker named Sarah Colt. And she had read Fly Girl, and she said, I'm doing this documentary. I don't know if anybody's going to buy it. I'm just doing some preliminary interviews. And I spent like 4 or 5 hours with her being filmed. And then PBS bought it, and it became, I highly recommend it, Fly With Me. And you can get it, on YouTube or PBS if you have a PBS, what do you call it, subscription or whatever. But Passport, thank you. But it is about how flight attendants were so at the forefront of women's rights. And a lot of this is in the documentary. Some I'm just kind of adding peripherally. But for example, the first flight attendant was hired. Her name was Ellen Church for United. It wasn't yet called United. It became United. she had a pilot's license. So she wanted to be a pilot, and they would not let a woman fly a plane. It's like in the 30s. And so she was a registered nurse, and she convinced them that there should be nurses on board because they would calm passengers. I mean, it was scary flying people. I mean, planes crashed all the time. It was quite a scary time, exciting time, but scary. And so she and 7 of her nurse friends from Chicago became the first stewardesses. Back then, on a layover, and they would do like 17 legs a day. They would stop 17 times. And they would have to do everything from load the luggage. I mean, the stewardesses did everything. And when they would land for a layover, the pilots got a hotel and the stewardesses slept on the plane. So the first thing that we won was the right to get hotel rooms. And we had to share them until the 70s. And this woman who was behind changing that is on that documentary, Fly With Me. It was one of the things she did was get people her own room. Mary Pat is her name. She's a hoot. She's like 96 or something. And I had dinner with her in Seattle doing promotion for the documentary. And she said that she got a letter from someone who said, "Dear Mary Pat, every time I'm on a layover and alone naked in my hotel room, I think of you." Then we had to fight for getting age discrimination changed. Flight attendants had to retire when they were 34. As TWA famously said, if a man doesn't want them when they're 34, TWA sure doesn't. So that got changed. Then changing so that we could keep our jobs when we got married. And then when we had children, which that changed in the 80s, if you can believe it. The last fight was weight that Leslie had referred to. You'd get off a plane and you'd have what we called a weight check. You probably called it the same thing. Clipboard, supervisor, take you down to a scale, weigh you, even 1 pound over, and you're put on probation. And you have 3 chances to lose that weight. Now, at TWA, and I'm not sure about American, but at TWA, in the application was a weight and height chart. And so it was like, I'm 5'8". And so I could weigh 140 pounds. That was the max I could weigh. I got hired at 125. I had to keep my hiring weight. I didn't have 15 pounds to play with. I could not go above 125. Yeah, I know, it's crazy. So my wonderful roommate, Linda, there were 6 of us living in Boston, in this great apartment near the airport. And I came home from a flight, and my roommate Linda is just in tears, bags packed. She had to lose 3 pounds and didn't do it, and she was fired and sent home. Yeah, and that was in 1979. Wait, yeah. You know, I was curious when I was writing Fly Girl how because now you can't have that weight thing. So I was wondering, how do they get around it? And so I looked at some job applications for a couple airlines, and it's worded very cagily. You must be able to comfortably fit down the aisle and through the emergency window exit over the wing. So that's how they can keep from hiring you. Yeah. But anyway, that was the last fight, was weight. But we finally won in 1996. So this is still very new.
It was a
Class action suit. Yep.
and it was the Marines regulation. That's what the Marines use.
That's right.
So that's why we did a class.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
Yep. Yes.
I have 2 vary from, I guess, the golden age, early 60s. I was a very small child, flying to Wisconsin to visit my grandparents, and they'd bring out the lovely dinner trays, and each tray had a 4-pack of Viceroy cigarettes.
Yeah. They didn't.
As a 7.
They didn't have that when I started in the 70s, but how about you, Leslie? Did you hand out cigarettes? People have told me about that.
I was too busy smoking them in the
We used to sell them. We used to sell them on international flights.
And then the other experience with flight attendants was we would fly from Chicago to Manitowoc, Wisconsin on North Central Airlines. And the cabin was not pressurized.
Right.
So they would come around and hand out individually wrapped chiclets. And then when we got to Manitowoc, they would announce, we now have to circle the airport until all the cows get off.
This is why I wanted to fly for TWA. Any questions? Yes, sir. No, I didn't say that. I was still part of it in 78. Well, deregulation is kind of the marker people use. I don't think there's actually a definitive thing, but deregulation changed everything. I mean, that's why it's the way it is now, actually. The cost, the seats. I just broke a microphone.
We first started, coach out from, say, New York to LA was $4,000.
Yeah.
And first class was probably $6,500. And then deregulation, you could go around the world for $200.
Yeah, the CAB set all the fares.
Yeah, that was my next question. When you go to these luxurious things, how much does
Yeah.
fly?
Oh, it's very, very rarefied, for sure. I mean, I know that for several years when I began, you never saw a woman in first class, unless it was Diana Ross. I mean, it was all businessmen. I did too. She spread herself around a little bit.
She's a cutie.
Yeah, but I mean, it would be all businessmen, unless a woman was famous, because their companies were paying. It was very expensive to fly.
And they pay for it.
Yeah.
None of us point system.
No points, no frequent flyer miles, no. Yes? The marriage was in the 60s, I think, the late 60s. Yeah, late 60s.
My sister went to the airline store. She went to Minneapolis for training and everything. And the guy she was dating, she got back with him, they got engaged, and she.
Yeah, couldn't do it. Yeah, right. I've heard some stories from the documentary, like response to the documentary, where people would be married secretly, and they'd have to have two phones, like the husband could never answer the TWA phone or whatever. Crazy, yes. Yes, they absolutely did. Yep, the male flight attendants, yes, but they had weight limits too. Yeah.
Could they be married?
Well, they came later, so it already had passed that you could be married. Yeah, they didn't get special treatment. Mm-mm. Yes.
Can you describe how you would deliver a tray of food in the days before airlines had a tray connected to the seat in front of you?
Well, when I flew, there was a seat. Yeah, I think that's been a long time. Yeah. But I will say that I'm still a stickler for this. It drives my husband crazy. You always served with the protein facing the person. You would never get like a crooked tray of food. And when you put the drink down, before the meal was served, you put the TWA napkin with the TWA logo in the right-hand corner. I mean, I could be written up for not doing that. So when someone just slaps down the thing and puts the thing, I'm like, ooh, not good. Not good.
Are there rules that you wish, are there procedures you wish were still in place?
Yeah, like let's board from the back forward. It drives me crazy. Oh my God, I don't get it. We're all bumping into each other and putting this, used to be so like from the back, row 28 to 35, then row 20 to 28. European airlines still do it that way. Yeah. Yes.
Just a short anecdote about good marketing. In '72, I received a letter in the mail offering me, I was in college, offering me my first credit card.
Yep.
Which I accepted. And it was a TWA getaway card.
I love it.
$300 limit, so I couldn't get it.
You couldn't even get to Boston on that, bro. That's funny. Yeah. What else? I know. Yes.
You said you were in for 8 years.
It was a labor strike. So 1986, TWA was bought by a corporate raider named Carl Icahn, who had no intention of saving the airline. In fact, he didn't care about aviation at all. TWA had a very spotty financial history. I mean, they were started by Howard Hughes, And I flew with women who would tell stories about being on a plane, and Howard Hughes would get on with like Ava Gardner and Cary Grant and all these movie stars, make all the passengers get off and like kind of hijack the plane. And they were like, yeah, we had to fly around with them for like 3 weeks, all, to like Nice and all these places. Sounds pretty good to me, but so Carl Icahn bought it. It was in trouble financially, but it always was, with the intention of just selling it for parts. And contract negotiations were coming. And he asked for 15% from the machinists and the pilots and 28% from the flight attendants, because he said they're just girls. And at that time, 40% were males. I mean, it was ridiculous. He lowered it to 21%, but increased work rules, so you'd be working more and making less. And the pilots, when they signed their new contract, agreed to cross a picket line if we struck. So we went on strike. Icahn had secretly hired 2,000 flight attendants and trained them at a hotel near Kennedy Airport. And so the day, I showed up, it was March and rainy, in my uniform with my picket sign, and the pilots crossed the picket line, and 2,000 flight attendants went on, and we never could shut down the airline. So we all lost our jobs. Now, there's a nice ending to this. I lived happily ever after ending. 3 years later, we all got our jobs back because we won a class action suit because he was so sexist. And we had him on tape, for some of the things he said, which I can't even repeat here. They're so horrible. We got our jobs back. By that time, my first 2 novels had been published. And I was like, oh my God, I got my job back at I want to do it. And I was like, but can I do, what do I do? I'm teaching at NYU now, and I'm on book tours, and my life has changed. But I wanted my job back. I loved that job so much. My indecision led me to do nothing. I put the acceptance letter, or come back for training in St. Louis, whatever. I put it away. I kept every day, should I do it? Should I not do it? And ultimately, I did nothing. A year passed. I get a letter saying, because you are still technically an employee of TWA, you now have free passes for life. People who had quit didn't get that. People who said, I'm not coming back. So as my friend wisely said, your life or TWA's? Because mine continues and TWA stopped. But I had about 10 years of free passes, so that was pretty nice. So I did get some schadenfreude there. Yeah. See just don't make up your mind, just think about it. Yes.
You hear all these stories now today about passengers who are violent, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about, did that happen before, or are we seeing an increase? Is it social media? What's going on?
Well, I think what we think of was during the pandemic. I mean, I was just telling Leslie, my friend who flew for 35 years for TWA, he was with me at TWA, and then he went to American and flew 35 years for American. He took a retirement during the pandemic because he was hearing all these stories from people who were flying. And he was, and people were mad, and they didn't want to wear masks, and you're jammed in there. I mean, we've all been on these planes. You can't stretch your legs. You don't get food. If you're changing planes, sometimes you don't get food for 12 hours or something. And so I think that kind of escalated things. I think it's calmed down now. People are back to what it was before the pandemic. In my years of flying, and I'm sure Leslie has many more stories than this, I just had one guy who kind of went off the rails. He thought I was hiding the manicotti, which no one wanted that manicotti, I just want to tell you. So I said, we're out of manicotti, but we have our delicious short ribs. He's like, you've got the manicotti. And I said, there is no manicotti on this plane. He's like, you're hiding it for your friends. I'm like, sir, I don't know anybody on this plane. I don't have friends here. I know you're hiding it. And I was like, so I just kind of walked away, got the short ribs, I put him down, and he freaked out. And he started banging the overhead, where your light and stuff is, so hard that the whole compartment, the oxygen masks dropped, the overhead compartment popped up, and he started lunging for me. And so flight attendants came running, and the pilot came running, and they had to restrain him, and we had to get the police and all this stuff, all over manicotti. So, people are funny. You don't know. Yeah.
Hi, excuse me, get my courage up here. I'm a kindred spirit. I work for United Airlines and retired from United.
Yeah, all right.
I was a steward.
Yep.
I started as a steward. And, yeah, it was a great job. I loved it. I still reminisce. I still get together with my airline friends.
Yeah, yeah.
And we have a group called Wings. And, yeah, it was fun. So I totally relate to all your stories.
Yeah.
When did you start?
I'm 68.
Whoa.
Yeah.
She beat us.
Yeah, sure, 10 years.
Those were the days. Those were the days.
So when I was hired by United, everybody told me, don't go with TWA, go with United, because they're more financially stable, which proved to be true, because United is still flying. But they told me I was going to be based in Cleveland, and I'm like, and I looked at the routes, and I was like, no. And so I went for the one that ultimately went on strike and went out of business. But,
Fortunately, I was based in LA.
yeah, good for you, yeah.
And I also did the no marriage rule, because I married this guy.
Oh,
They had to hire me back.
yeah, that's right, you won your job back, yeah. Yeah, so the people who had to leave for getting married and having kids all got their jobs back if they wanted them. Yeah.
And fat.
Yeah. And the weight people too. Anything else?
Did you learn French?
Well, no, I took it for 7 years. That was the best I could do.
Use it on a flight to Paris.
Never. I couldn't speak it, obviously. No, that was a big no. Yeah. The worst flight I ever had, I think, was one when a passenger died. And I had to do CPR. And he died while we were giving him CPR. And you can't stop legally until a professional comes. So we had to divert. So we probably did it an hour knowing he had died. And I'm like 22. I was pretty freaked out. And then we land, the EMTs take him off the plane. Then we have to still get to wherever we were going. It was to St. Louis. The plane was dead quiet, like everybody was freaked out. Got off the plane, and there's this guy standing there, and he's like, I'm looking for Joe, whoever. And I had to tell him. So that was a bad flight. I never did. Someone did go into labor, but she was far from having the baby. Yeah. 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 Yes, I did. Dreams do come true. So I am happy to sign books over here. Thank you so much for being here.